Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining KNKX and BirdNote for a special trip to Western Washington's Skagit Valley. We're going to see and hear about the amazing array of migratory birds that make this region their home during the winter months. My name is Trina Bayard. I'm Director of Bird Conservation for Audubon, Washington. I'm Science Advisor for BirdNote, and I'm also your host today. We welcome your questions, and we'll get to as many as possible in the last part of the show. Please ask your questions to our guest speakers and myself using the chat function. If you're new to Zoom or unfamiliar, the chat icon is located at the bottom of your screen. After the event, we'll email you a resource list with more information, beautiful photos and sounds, and tips for learning more about birds and winter birding. Before we meet our special guests, let's take an adventure on the Skagit with BirdNote.
This is BirdNote. Come with me today to the Skagit Flats, an hour north of Seattle, where dramatic scenes of wildlife unfold every winter. The flats are broad, level deltas where the river drains into Skagit Bay. Mostly open farm fields, the flats offer a wildlife panorama with few equals in North America. We're just getting out of the car, and already a V of trumpeter swans flies overhead. The wings of these snow-white behemoths span nearly 7 feet. Every direction we look, immense bald eagles stand ready to give chase for a winter meal. There's some on utility poles, some more in open fields. A dozen eagles share a view of the bay from the same cottonwood tree. Keen-eyed hawks patrol from fence line to fence line. There goes a northern harrier flying low, swooping, tilting, scanning the ground for small rodents. A peregrine falcon views the entire scene from atop the tallest tree around. Nearby, a flock of nearly 10,000 snow geese blankets the ground. Whoa! There goes an eagle toward the flock. What a clamor as the frightened geese lift up in unison. I'm Michael Stein, and you'll be hearing me on BirdNote from time to time.
And now for the main event. I'm thrilled to present today's guest speakers. We have Stephanie Fernandez, who has a background in marine biology and is the founder of Skagit Guided Adventures. Before that, she spent decades as a tour guide in the United States, Mexico, and Canada, and her popular winter birding tours showcase the diversity of bird life around the Skagit Valley. We also have Jeff Osmundson, president of Skagit Audubon Society. He worked for the USDA Forest Service for over 30 years, and after retirement started a small business specializing in the review of large land real estate. We also have Fern Naomi Renville, a Dakota storyteller, theater artist, and enrolled citizen of the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate. Fern is motivated by revitalizing the theatrical traditions of her Dakota oral culture and by a vision of the contributions of Indigenous peoples being recognized as foundational elements of the American theatrical canon and aesthetic. We look forward to hearing from all of our special guests, and we're going to get started with Stephanie. Stephanie, welcome.
Well, thank you, Trina, and thank you, KNKX and BirdNote, for bringing your audience to Skagit Valley today. So welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to be able to share with you today the most memorable experience I had in the last 6 years that I've been guiding my birding tours around here. But before I do that, I want to introduce you to Skagit Valley and to the most iconic of our birds of winter, our snow geese. So to get us started, in this first photo, I'm going to show you our exact location in Northwest Washington. So Skagit Valley occupies the southwest corner of Skagit County, and we are nestled in between the Salish Sea to the west and the North Cascade Mountains to the east. Now, for those of you wondering what Skagit means, that's the name of a group of Coast Salish peoples who once thrived in the area. Well, I arrived in Skagit Valley in 2014, and to this day, find it to be a magical place for birding. In this next photo, we'll see an aerial view of the landscape. So in the background are the North Cascades and Mount Baker, our local volcano. Below them are the farmlands of Skagit Valley and the wetlands of the Skagit River Delta at the edge of Skagit Bay. These farm fields and protected wetlands provide essential stopover habitat for birds that are migrating up and down the Pacific Flyway. And in winter, it is home to thousands and thousands of beautiful shorebirds, raptors, and waterfowl. In fact, Skagit Valley supports the largest concentration of snow geese in the lower 48. In this next photo, we'll take a close look at the snow geese. So as adults, they are completely white and have black wingtips, pink feet, and a pink bill. That rusty color you see on their faces, they acquire that when they're digging for food in the iron-rich soils. The young ones, the goslings, they're gray all over. And when fully grown, they'll weigh about 5 pounds and have a wingspan of about 3 feet. Now, as far as I know, the oldest snow goose on record was 27. Now, these snow geese mate for life, and they produce 2 to 6 goslings a year up in their summer breeding grounds on the Arctic tundra. Now, our snow geese come from Marengo Island, which is way up in northern Siberia. And after a month-long migration, they arrive in Skagit Valley. In this next photo, we'll see them here in Skagit Valley. So nowadays, we get about 60,000 of them that come here to feed on winter wheatgrass, as well as leftover corn and potatoes. Now, who knew? They like potatoes too. Well, they arrive sometime in October and leave sometime like late March, early April. So that gives us about 6 months to enjoy them, and the rest of our birds of winter as well. But by far, it's the snow geese that steal the show around here, and everybody wants to see them. So I always include them in my birding adventures. Now, even though these very gregarious birds form these huge, maybe I should say colossal flocks, they can be hard to find sometimes. And that's because they move around the valley from day to day and even throughout the day. But when you find them, you find them. And it's a lot of fun to watch and listen to people's reactions when they see the geese. Especially kids. Now, in particular, these 2 Girl Scouts. I've never experienced so much unfiltered, raw excitement coming out of 2 human beings. And that's what I love about my job, is to connect people of all ages to nature through birds. Well, to finish, let's listen to the girls in this next video.
Oh, good. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for not going over us. Because there we would have gotten for sure. 8,000 birds. So pretty. Oh no, they're coming up. Wait, are they coming? Are they coming? Are they coming? Oh no. Yeah, let's get close to the car because I don't want to get too close to it. It's beautiful. It looks like a bird mirror. It's just like, I'm glad we found them.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was just terrific. I just love that recording of those young ladies. You can just feel the palpable sense of delight and wonder in their voices. I love the thank you. So really, really great moment captured there. And you know, as Stephanie said, snow geese are a big draw in Skagit Valley, along with the other big white birds, the trumpeter swans. It's also a great time to see migratory shorebirds. Puget Sound is a really important wintering and migratory stopover area for shorebirds, for waterfowl. We have species like dunlin that congregate here in the tens of thousands in the winter, all kinds of ducks. We see tens of thousands of mallard and American widgeon and northern pintail. And, you know, I'm seeing over chat that we have a lot of people joining us from elsewhere in the country. And so I also wanted to let you know, if you're curious about whether snow geese might be present where you live, they do occur in other places in the winter, along the Missouri River, the mid-Atlantic coast, sort of Nebraska, south through Texas, and the Central Valley of California. But you can always go on ebird.org and look for local sightings in your area. And that can be a really great way to find out whether there's been any recent sightings. I also wanted to point out, you know, one thing to consider if you've never been birding in the Skagit, or you're interested in looking for some of these big flocks of birds, they do often aggregate on farm fields, right? Where they're really attracted to the crops that might be left there. And, you know, farm fields are private property. And so one way to head out and to do so in a way that's respectful both of the birds and of private property is to connect with a guide, to connect with a local birding club or an Audubon chapter. They can help you sort of get to know the area. They know where the best spots are. And of course, having a little help with bird identification is always helpful. So let's hear now from Jeff, who's going to share more about his experience with birds in the Skagit Valley.
Hello, everyone. Awful glad to be here with you. We're going to start our little journey up high in the Skagit County in the North Cascades, where the taller peaks are 9,000 feet, where Washington Pass is our one access to the east side, and that's summer only. If you could get there right now, you'd probably find over 200 inches of snow. You can't get there right now. No. A little further down the valley, the Skagit River comes in from the north, and the Sauk River joins it from the south. And in and around that confluence, a month or two ago, you probably would have seen 100 or more eagles up and down the river. Quite an amazing sight. Also at that confluence area and up and down both the Sauk and the Skagit River, early on in early times were indigenous people, the Upper Skagit, part of the Coast Salish and the Swinomish. The Swinomish and the other Coast Salish were a little further down the valley, but they mingled quite a bit. And those tribes and peoples are still with us today and still being still a valuable part of our community. A little down further in the valley, like Stephanie showed you, there's the valley broadens out to agriculture. It's the #1 industry in Skagit County, and you can find blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, and our world famous tulips are also down in that part of the valley. That part of the valley is interesting because about the 1860s, some of the farmers decided that they wanted to try to create more farmland. It's so rich here. And so they started building dikes. And a lot of those dikes are still in place today. It's part of where the tulip fields are. But when you have dikes and farmland, you have less saltwater marsh. And so those were going away. Recently, WDFW, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and nonprofits started buying some of those old farmlands back. And in the last 20 to 30 years, they've been starting to remove those dikes. One of the areas that has happened is an area called Wiley Slough. And my wife Colleen and I have been going there for, gosh, more than 20 years. We really, really enjoy it. We can, on a nice day, if we're there for a couple of hours, we can see 30 bird species to 40 bird species. eBird lists the total species cited there at over 230 species. That's a lot. In the winter, we can have all sorts of ducks and shorebirds. There's still a few passerines around, and you never know what you're going to see. One of the things that is a real draw in that area is an eagle tree. Before that area was reclaimed into salt marsh, the eagle tree was really quite close, and people love to watch it, photograph it. As the saltwater came back into that area, those trees died, and ultimately that eagle nest fell down. It was a disappointment, but you know, that's the reclamation project. But those eagles, or some that were similar, started building a nest about 200 yards away from the dike. Still close enough to see, but not close enough to be bothered by people, I don't think. And so Colleen and I started watching that, and we would go out there from time to time. Last year we went out there, and the eagles were sitting on the nest. And the speculation at Wiley was, are there going to be chicks this year? We went a number of times, and finally one time we were watching with our scope, and we could see the little fuzzy eagle chick heads raise up above the nest, and see their little eyes moving back and forth. And another time we went out there, and we were watching the chicks in the nest. They were getting a little bigger, and Colleen mentioned that the other adult eagle was coming into the nest and was carrying something. We both looked, and sure enough, the eagle was carrying a green-winged teal. Green-winged teal is one of our smaller ducks. And that parent landed on the nest and dropped the teal on the side of the nest, and the green-winged teal wasn't quite ready to give up and flopped around a little bit and fell off the nest. And immediately the other adult jumped out of the nest, swooped down, and literally caught that teal even before it hit the ground. It was an amazing sight. A little while later, the eagles started getting big. They started looking like the immatures that we see, all dark, pretty big birds. And you could see that they were getting a little older. They would sit on the edge of the nest or off on a branch, and they'd spread their wings, and in the wind they'd get a little lift, and they'd be nervous about it and settle down. I've been told that seeing the first flight of an eagle is an amazing thing, and we didn't get to see it that day or other days. The next time we came back, the eagle nest was empty. They had fledged, and they were off learning how to hunt with their parents and becoming part of the cycle of Wiley Slough. And just for interest, Colleen and I have been going there this spring, and the eagles are once again sitting on the edge of their nest. We don't know yet if they have eggs, and we won't know yet for a little while if they'll hatch out those eggs, and we'll see little fuzzy heads show up. So it begins again. It's the cycle at Wiley, and we really enjoy it. We'd welcome you to Skagit County if you would be interested in joining us sometime. So that's my story for today. Thanks to KNKX and BirdNote for this. And right now we get to see a bald eagle, a national symbol, a BirdNote episode that I'm sure you'll enjoy, and you'll get to see the fuzzy heads. So thank you very much.
This is BirdNote. Look high into the top branches of a tall tree, and you may see the source of this call, a bald eagle. Yes, that squeaky door sound comes from the official bird of the United States of America. Sitting about 3 feet tall, this majestic bird has a wingspan of more than 6 feet. Stretch your arms as far as you can, and imagine a bird whose reach is even greater. Mature bald eagles have snowy white heads and tails, and powerful dark brown bodies. Their eyes, beaks, and taloned feet are shades of bright orange and yellow. Immature bald eagles, on the other hand, look so different that John James Audubon thought they were another species entirely. Young bald eagles are a patchwork of dark mottled colors, and their eyes, feet, and beaks are drabber shades of gray, brown, and yellow. It can take young eagles up to 4 years before they grow into their iconic adult colors. Even with a call that sounds like a rusty gate, the bald eagle is lord of the landscape. Go eye to eye with a bald eagle when you come to our website, birdnote.org. I'm Michael Stein.
I love that squeaky door reference. Thank you, Jeff, for sharing more about the Skagit Valley and its ability to sustain a variety of birds over the winter, including the iconic bald eagle. You know, a couple of things stand out to me from your reflections. One, you've highlighted the way that all the distinct environments of Skagit County really come together to help support bird diversity in the valley. You know, everything that happens in that area, from how much snow we get up in the Cascades and how that melts off in the spring to support our rivers, our salmon, all of these things then in turn provide food and habitat for birds. You know, you mentioned that the Department of Fish and Wildlife and others are doing a lot of restoration in the area. And we also can give a lot of credit to the local tribes who are doing all kinds of restoration and continuing their stewardship of this area. I also love the way that you and your wife really connected to a place and a pair of birds over time. You know, a lot of people think about birding as maybe an exercise in species identification or coming up with a list of how many birds you've seen and where, but really connecting to birds at a location, whether that's your backyard or your local preserve, can be a really gratifying way to connect with birds and to just be curious about what they're up to and how things are going for them. So really encourage people to just get out and enjoy birds in a different way, and especially this idea that we can go out at different seasons and see birds engaging in different activities is really helpful. So of course, the story of bird migration and birds' connection to the earth and the sky is so much bigger than the Skagit Valley. Now we're going to turn to Fern, who will share a story with us about that. Welcome, Fern.
Dakiapi. Hello, my relatives. Thank you, BirdNote and KNKX for the invitation. I am Dakota. My people's homeland is in the modern day Twin City area of Minnesota. And so Like the migratory birds in Skagit and Washington State, I am on a migratory route. I have traveled to find the warmth and the food, and that's why I'm here. I have been just recently spending time at the Ridgefield National Wildlife Refuge, a bit south of Skagit, where the sandhill cranes are starting to show up right now. And I wanted to share a story from home that came with me on my travels. And it's a story that my ancestor, a fellow named One Road, shared. And it is a story of the sandhill crane. Ehana, a long time ago, autumn had come to the land. Yes, it was getting very cold. And the birds that stayed in the north of the winter, like woodpecker, had prepared their lodges for the winter to come. Woodpecker, his lodge was inside a hollow tree. He had insulated this lodge with feathers and grass and filled all of the little nooks inside with nuts for the long winter. As he was just finishing putting in his last supplies for the winter, his friend Crane, Peril, showed up. Crane said, "What are you doing, Woodpecker?" "I'm getting ready for the long winter. What are you doing, my friend Peril? All of your relatives have left for the south. What are you doing here? Don't you know how deadly the winter here is?" Crane, I don't know why, said, "Oh, I've decided that I want to experience this winter that everyone talks about. It can't be that bad. You stay here." "Yes, but my people are experienced and prepared, and I have this lodge and it's full of food. That's how I'm going to survive. How will you survive?" Well, Crane said, "I will find someone who will invite me into their lodge for the winter, someone more hospitable than you." Well, Woodpecker, being a good friend, saw that Crane was serious. He intended to spend the winter in the north when all of his people had flown to the warm places like the coast. "Oh, Crane, you must come into my lodge." For you see, Woodpecker felt responsible for his friend. "You must come into my lodge and spend the winter with me. At least I know you won't freeze to death. But you don't even have any food." "Oh, I can gather some food," said Crane. "I'll go out and gather some wild rice bulbs." And he did. He gathered a whole lot of wild rice bulbs and stashed them inside Woodpecker's lodge. And then he joined his friend inside that hollow tree. Oh, it was very cozy at first. And yes, the days grew colder and colder. And finally, the snow came and the water froze. And Crane was enchanted. He jumped out of Woodpecker's lodge into the snow and he played in it. And when he grew cold, he got back inside the lodge and Woodpecker was starting a fire and they had food and told stories and it was really fun. "Oh, I think you've been exaggerating," said Crane. "This isn't bad at all. It's pretty fun." Well, day after day passed until one morning Crane woke up and he looked out and a warm breeze was blowing from the south and the snow was melting and the ice was melting. He looked down into that melting ice and he could see fish that were moving around. he jumped out of the lodge. He threw all his dried wild rice bulbs out of the lodge. Spring is here. And he caught some fish and brought them back into Woodpecker's lodge, who was just waking up, and said, Crane, what's going on? Spring is here, said Crane. I've caught some fresh fish. We won't have to eat that dried food any longer. No, 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 said Woodpecker. This is not spring. This is the midwinter thaw. Do not be deceived. Oh, but Crane knew better. However, the next morning, the cold returned. The ice was back, the water froze again, and fresh snow fell. And now Crane had no food to eat. And the really intense cold had arrived. Now, Woodpecker would have gladly shared his food with Crane, but he had nuts, and cranes can't live on nuts. And so Crane grew thinner and thinner. And as the winter proceeded, his once snowy feathers grew grayer and grayer from the fire, and the top of his head was red from huddling over that fire. And everyone was concerned that Crane would not survive till spring. And so all the animals met, for they were concerned for their friend Crane, as foolish as he was. One of us must travel to the Lodge of the South and ask Spring to come back early and save the life of Crane. Who shall go? After much conversation, the 4 best candidates were chosen. Otter, who's very persuasive and charming. Hawk, who's very fast. Tadpole, surprisingly talented for his size. And Fox, who's of course fast and clever. These 4 animals traveled to the Lodge of the Sun to the south to ask for Spring to return early and save the life of Crane. When they arrived and entered into the lodge, Otter found that the heat and warmth inside this lodge was too intense. In his fur coat, he got very uncomfortable and he left. Tadpole, however, slipped into this lodge and went to where the people were and started to tell them all about Crane and his dilemma. But Tadpole didn't have a mouth, so all these people could hear was mumbling, while everyone was distracted trying to understand what Tadpole was saying. Fox took the sunflower that was growing in this lodge. He took it and he tied it to his tail, and he ran. He ran as fast as he could, pursued by the 2 mountain lions that guarded this lodge. Fox ran for 2 days as fast as he could with that sunflower tied to his tail, and wherever he ran, behind him the ice melted and the land grew warm and spring arrived. Finally, he grew so exhausted, but then Hawk swooped in and took that sunflower and flew the last bit of way to the lodge of Woodpecker. And the next morning, Crane stepped out of Woodpecker's lodge to see that spring had arrived. He greeted his returning brothers from the coast and from the south, and they barely recognized him. Oh, how thin he was now. Oh, how gray his feathers. Like I said, the top of his head was stained red from the fire. Ever since then, the cranes follow the wisdom of this story, and they travel to the warm places for the winter, just like me. Thank you for letting me share this story.
Thank you, Fern. Such a wonderful story. And, you know, every time I hear this story, there's just so much to think about and to learn from. I love the way that the animals come together to support each other, and that message about listening and learning from our elders certainly strikes home, and one that I wouldn't mind my own children listening in on. Connecting to birds and nature through art, storytelling, and other types of creative expression can be a really gratifying way to connect with birds, to learn from birds and other animals, and sort of engaging in the art and creative expression of birds can be just a really wonderful way of connecting with others that share that appreciation. We've heard today about different ways of connecting with birds. Whether you live here in Washington and you can make trips to places like the Skagit Valley to see the geese, the swans, and the other birds of winter, whether you're new to birding and sort of wondering what it's all about and how to get started and how to get out there. I just really encourage all of you to tune into birds and to nature and to do so in a way that brings you joy. For some people, that's things like trying to figure out what species you're looking at and learning all about their life history. For others, it's just sort of taking comfort in the annual cycle of birds and their arrival and their activities and how nature sort of carries on no matter what us humans are up to. So let yourself be inspired by birds. Let yourself enjoy them. And then let yourself be moved to engage with birds in a way that gives back, that helps birds thrive. Birds are here for us, and we can be here for them too. So now let's meet up with our guest speakers again and take a look at some of your questions. We'll get to as many as we can in the time we have remaining. Do I have all my speakers back up? Stephanie, let's start with a question for you. This is one that comes up a lot. How do you tell the difference between swans and geese? And then once you've answered that question, are the snow geese still here or have they left yet?
Yes, great question. Thank you. Yes, and it is also on my birding adventures. It's one of the things that people really want to learn is how to tell them apart because they're both white. But so there's several ways to identify them by size, by how big their groups are, and also by sound. So like I said, both are white. The snow geese are smaller than the swans. The snow geese form larger flocks, whereas the swans are more in smaller groups and are more scattered throughout the valley. Now, and just as a side note, we have two species of swans here. We have the trumpeter swans as well as the tundras. However, there's of the swans that we see, about 3/4 of them are trumpeters and 1/4 of them are the tundras. And you can tell them by size, although it's a little hard sometimes, but the tundras are smaller and they have a yellow teardrop right here, which you really have to see with binoculars. So that's always something fun to try to show is the difference not only between the geese and the swans, but between the two species of swans. Now, the snow geese are still here and they're actually going to be leaving in a couple of weeks. So they usually leave, by the end of March, beginning of April. Usually it seems like as soon as the snow geese leave, the tulips are blooming. So it's really fun here in Skagit Valley. There's always something happening here in Skagit Valley.
Yeah, thank you. So it's not too late to make the trip up to see the snow geese and swans before they head north for the breeding season. Next up, I've seen a lot of questions come in around bald eagles. People love bald eagles. Jeff, this one's for you. What can you tell us about where bald eagles go at night? Do they go somewhere? Do they have different places they go at night versus the day? Have you ever observed anything like that?
Yeah, there's a fair number of people that study that. The U.S. Forest Service often has a group of people in non-COVID that watch for eagles. They do have roosting places. There's a phenomenon in the mountains and hills where mid-slope is generally warmer than high and low, and so in many cases the eagles kind of group up and head for those areas, and they'll roost in fir trees, in cottonwoods, in some of the bigger trees. I think when you're down in the flats this time of the year, I think that they probably roost more locally. But of course, for me, that's anecdotal. I haven't been studying them. I just kind of watch what they do from time to time. But yes, they do roost in different places than they eat during the day.
Great, thank you. The next question we have here is for Fern. Fern, this question is about connecting with birds and nature. The pandemic has pushed many of us to slow down and to notice nature more and to notice what's happening around us. Any thoughts about how to cultivate a closer connection to birds and the earth in our everyday lives?
I think you could follow a cue from all of the speakers above. What everyone here has in common is we're in relationship with birds. I love this pandemic silver lining of us all slowing down and seeing what's around us more, including the birds. For me, slowing down has meant sharing my stories more, and all of our traditional stories put us in relationship with the animal relatives again, just like everyone here. Everyone here is in relationship with the animal relatives. I know Stephanie was talking about how the migratory waterfowl of Skagit have a relationship with the humans. And the sandhill cranes in the Midwest have a historical relationship with Dakota farmers. We had our permanent summer planting villages where we grew corn, and cranes loved corn. So birds and humans have had a long relationship. This is just a wonderful chance to revitalize that relationship. It's not like we're rediscovering something or discovering something. It's reconnecting. And then I know that I'm always just reminded that humans on the evolutionary scale, we're so young, and birds are among our eldest elders and have so much to teach us. So cool things happening right now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So I have a question here. A big topic around birds this winter has been the salmonella situation. And this is something we're constantly getting questions about this at Audubon. And so I thought it'd be worthwhile just to speak to it quickly here. Many of you might have heard advice in January to take down your feeders, that there was an outbreak happening amongst birds of salmonella. And this happens sometimes. It's not a terribly unusual thing to happen, but this year we had really large concentrations of finches, including pine siskins, that sort of were pushed down into the lower 48 because of really severe cold weather and conditions up north. And so this year, we've been asking everyone to take down their feeders. I know it's really hard. I personally love to watch the birds at my feeders in my backyard. And we are still recommending that people keep your feeders down until April. At that time, birds have access to a variety of food sources, and they're just less likely to clump up at your feeders. And so that's sort of the current advice. And we tend to follow the guidance of the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And those of you elsewhere in the country might also be experiencing a similar situation. So that's what's going on with the birds and their health. Let's get to some more questions here. So Stephanie, you have spent years as a guide in other parts of the world. I'm sure every place you've toured is special. What makes the Skagit Valley different from other places you've traveled and witnessed wildlife?
Yeah, so different habitats attract different species of birds. What I've really enjoyed in Skagit Valley is enjoying the snow geese, because I hadn't seen those anywhere else. So I've really valued spending time with them. I've learned a lot from them. And something personally that I've learned from being out watching the birds is farming. You know, I grew up in Mexico City, not knowing where my food came from. So birds have really helped me appreciate where food comes from and all the effort going into it. And then going to some of the shorebirds, I've gotten to see a lot of dunlin, which I hadn't seen before, and shovelers, ducks, widgeons. So by going to different places and different habitats just allows you to experience different species of birds. So I would encourage everyone to, go out and explore different habitats so you can experience the different birds in each of those habitats.
Yeah, it's so interesting how when we witness really large gatherings of animals, of birds, it really helps you sort of place yourself in the context of the earth and to just sort of look on in wonder and awe at and just imagine, right, the concentrations of birds and wildlife that used to exist here, and to sort of take that in and think about the ways that these birds connect us to places, very wild places far away in Canada, in the Arctic, and down to Central and South America. It's just a really special part of witnessing those big flocks and to think about bird migration.
Indeed.
Jeff, I've got another bald eagle question for you. So the question is around food. So do raptors or birds of prey like bald eagle adapt their food source depending on where they are?
Oh,
what do you see eagles eating when you're watching them?
Sure, that's a great question. In my opinion, eagles eat where the food is, and that may seem simplistic, but they have to find the food. So what we see in Skagit County, as well as counties to the north and south, is that earlier in the season, October, November, December, the eagles will be up in the rivers, and they'll watch. We have 5 species of salmon in the Skagit and the Nooksack and the Stillaguamish, and so they'll be waiting for the salmon to spawn and die, and then they'll eat salmon carcasses. And there truly are, on the Nooksack, there's one viewing spot where you can literally stand in one spot and see hundreds and hundreds of eagles. On the Skagit, almost as many. When the salmon are starting to wash away with high water in the winter, there's not as much food for the eagles, so they drift down into the flats where all the wintering ducks and shorebirds and everything else congregates, waiting to go north in order to breed. So it's like a smorgasbord for the eagles. And in the Skagit Flats area, you can stand in one place and turn around and see on a given day 100 eagles. They're starting to get a little bit, a little fewer right now because they're starting to, in my opinion, stage a little bit further north. So we're down to 20s and 30s, but the ducks and the other waterfowl are still here. So as long as they're here, we'll have at least some eagles.
Yeah, one of the things we've seen, as bald eagles have made such a dramatic recovery across the United States, here in Western Washington and north into Canada, salmon is a major food source, as you say, for eagles. And so one of our concerns as salmon are increasingly depleted is that eagles turn to other food sources like ducks and seabirds and can put a lot of pressure on those populations. So it really speaks to, the web of life and how you never quite know when you tug on one strand, how it's going to impact other parts of the ecosystem, and just really speaks to the importance of keeping all parts of the system really healthy and functioning. So Fern, folks are wondering if you have any public events coming up in the area or online. So some questions about where they can hear more of your stories.
Oh, that's awesome. Sound Theater Company has a free downloadable audio play. It's an adaptation of a play that was supposed to open 2 weeks after Washington State shut down last year. And so it's a play that I co-wrote and adapted that is based in traditional story. It hasn't been announced yet, but I'm also going to be a part of the Washington State Speakers Bureau, the next lineup, and I will in fact be telling stories that focus on female Indigenous power.
Very cool, thank you. I have a question here about, about kind of the state of birds. Are birds in peril? What can the average person do to help them? Also, as Director of Bird Conservation, what do I do? My job is really, in a nutshell, to be the voice for birds, right? To use the best available science and observations and information of all types to figure out what birds need and how we can work together with our elected officials, with our land management agency, with tribes, with the public, to make sure we have clean air, clean water, clean soils, plentiful food. Birds need many of the things that we need. And so yes, the question, are birds in peril? It's a challenging time for non-human species on this planet, and birds are certainly in peril. There was, a landmark study recently that showed that there are 3 billion fewer birds in North America than there were in the 1970s. And this is certainly cause for alarm. We're also really concerned about the ways that a changing climate will impact food and habitat and conditions for birds. The things that you can do are to be a good steward, right? Maybe that looks like planting native plants in your backyard or your schoolyard or your place of worship. It's reducing your use of pesticides. It's keeping those cats inside and making sure your windows are bird safe. It's also things like using your power as a consumer. The decisions we make about what we buy has implications for farming practices and for the amount of waste that we produce. And you can use your voice, right? Letting your neighbors, your friends, your elected officials know that you value birds and nature, and that things like clean air, clean water, clean soils, these are all things that birds need and we need. So to close it up here, I just want to invite all of my speakers, if you have any last thoughts to share, any reflections that come to mind on the program today.
Just as I like to say, get yourself outside and rewild your spirit with birds.
I agree with Stephanie. Get outside. I mean, here in Western Washington, it's an absolutely beautiful day, and we're very happy to do this program for you. But getting outside is where it's at for revitalizing yourself, getting in touch with nature and with the birds and with everything that's around them. And one last thing, Stephanie and Trina and Fern, thank you so much. You guys have been wonderful, and I really appreciated listening to you.
Likewise, Jeff.
Absolutely. Likewise, I have learned so much from getting to listen to you folks. And I so appreciate getting to share stories. And I so appreciate hearing folks advocate for supporting local tribes. I think that the supporting tribal sovereignty is a powerful way to protect our environment. Tribes are literally leading the fight to protect our resources at this point.
Well, thank you, everyone. This ends our Q&A session. It wraps up our Winter Birds in the Skagit Valley program. Thank you so much to our guest speakers, Stephanie Fernandez, Jeff Osmundson, Fern Naomi Renville. Thank you to you, our audience, for joining us today. And I'd also like to thank Adrian Flores from KNKX for your tech support, Jessica Rue-Franz from BirdNote, Brenda Goldstein-Young and Aaron Hennessy from KNKX, who helped pull this whole event together. Keep an eye out for that follow-up email from KNKX and BirdNote with a resource list to learn more about the amazing birds you heard about today and how you can get more involved in winter birding. And finally, just a reminder that both BirdNote and KNKX are nonprofit organizations. They depend on the support of listeners and viewers like you to continue producing and sharing episodes and to make events like this possible. You can support these organizations through the links in the chat section or by following instructions to donate in the upcoming slides. I just want to say thank you again to all of you, and we will see you next time.